What is this magic? Is this even real? Welcome back, friends. I am so excited about this video because I am trying out something brand new and I think you're gonna love it too. Today we are exploring Brusho. What is Brusho, you might ask? Well, in case you've never heard of it, Brusho is a highly pigmented ink dye based watercolor that actually comes in a dry crystal powder form. It's manufactured by a company called Colourcraft Colors and Adhesives Limited, which is based in Sheffield, England. Now, the company's actually been around since 1978, but Brusho has become available and popular in the United States only within like the last 10 years. So in case you're curious, nobody paid me or asked me to make this video. I just really wanted to try it personally. Ever since I saw it in a watercolor artist magazine, it was just super cool. So I bought these products with my own money. Brusho comes in more than 30 different colors. I just ordered the set of 12 because I thought it had a great selection of warm and cool primaries, along with some beautiful secondary colors like orange, 2 different greens, a purple, brown, and black. I ordered my set from Blick Art Supplies for $45.45, which ends up being about $3.79 per color. The color crystals come in a simple box. There's a catalog included inside that offers some tips and instructions for using Brusho, along with an extensive list of other products that can be used with Brusho. Now, I didn't see anything in it that was all that helpful for getting started. In fact, just before trying out this product, I totally admit, I binge watched a bunch of videos on YouTube just to see kind of how everyone else likes to use it. Most of these other reviewers recommend not even opening the little plastic jars, but rather taking a thumbtack or a push pin and inserting it into the center of each little canister. This creates a tiny little hole and you can use it like a little salt and pepper shaker. It's more than sufficient for just shaking out tiny amounts of the crystals. A little bit goes a long way. Another great suggestion I picked up from one of these videos was to label the top of each jar using a Sharpie so that you can just store them in a box and easily see the name of each color right on top. Once I'd prepped each jar this way, I thought I would make a swatch chart so I could see what the colors look like on watercolor paper. The swatch chart was useful for testing 3 different specific attributes of the Brusho colors. First of all, I wanted to try sprinkling the crystals directly onto wet paper. I created a small rectangular pool of water at the bottom of each swatch and then carefully sprinkled out just a few grains of pigment. This was definitely the most fun I've had making swatches in a long time. I mean, look at this magic. The coolest thing about the Brusho is that many of these crystal mixes are multiple colors. For example, you can see that the ultramarine blue is a combination of blue and purple, and the leaf green is a mixture of yellow and blue crystals. The brown and black, these were fascinating colors. They each contain at least 3 different pigments. This particular application of the medium is, I think, clearly what artists love the most about Brusho. I honestly couldn't wait to play more with this. The second thing I tested was to see how well the colors work when treated just like regular watercolor. To do this, I shook out a few crystals onto my clean palette, mixed in some water, and painted the swatch onto my chart using a regular watercolor brush, gradually diluting the mixture to adjust the values just like you would with a regular swatch. The colors are vibrant and beautiful, and they work flawlessly as a watercolor paint. The only thing is that they are highly staining, so you have to be really careful with them. They don't necessarily lift very easily. The third thing I was testing was the transparency of each color. You can see I drew a Sharpie line at the top and painted over that with each swatch. Every single color is perfectly transparent. You don't see any pigment over the top of the Sharpie. And look at these yummy swatches. They're just so gorgeous. Now, before continuing, I should point out that because these are dye-based pigments, they're not archival. If you plan on framing and displaying your art, I don't recommend using Brusho. But wait, don't write it off completely yet. Many of you might hear the words "not light fast" and immediately say, no, that's not for me. But just hear me out. If you like to digitally scan your art and create prints to sell, which is something I actually do with my Etsy shop, or if you're an illustrator, or if you create artwork to license, or if you just enjoy making cards, bookmarks, any fun little crafts, or maybe watercolor journaling, bullet journaling is your thing, Brusho is a perfect medium for all of that. It can create these amazing effects that I don't think are really possible with any other kind of watercolor paint, at least not that I've tried. There are lots of different ways to play with the Brusho beyond the simple methods I used in those swatches. The most common way that artists activate the pigment crystals is by sprinkling them on dry watercolor paper and then spraying them with an atomizer bottle or a spray bottle. Holding your bottle up higher will give you a little bit more control. You can also spray directionally to kind of force the crystals to push a certain way, but once you have added water, there's very little you can do to control the Brusho. It's best if you don't try to manipulate it too much. Just let it do its thing. One way that you can sort of ensure that the Brusho stays more fenced in to a controlled space is by starting with wet areas of the painting. You can control where you wet your paper, and so somewhat control where the Brusho is activated. Once you have your wet areas ready to go, sprinkle the Brusho crystals lightly over the paper. After the painting dries completely, you can gently brush off any excess. Now, I'm guessing you guys clicked on this thumbnail because you saw this gorgeous blend of colors on this iris painting. So just let me tell you the story of the iris painting. After testing out the Brusho and making swatches, I could not wait to use it on an actual painting. I had been working on this large 12 by 12 inch iris painting for the last few days, and I was really happy with the flower petals. I spent a lot of time on it, but my first layer of leaves in the background was flat and uninspiring, and I wasn't really sure what to do with it, to be honest. It was a far cry from the exciting and gorgeous result I was really hoping for with this painting. I debated for a long time over whether I should try the Brusho in the background, and I almost chickened out. That little devil on my shoulder was whispering, "No, you're gonna ruin it." But instead, I listened to a different voice, the one that was speaking louder, and it said, "How will you know if you don't try it? Just play. Have an attitude of childlike wonder. Won't it be fun to see what happens?" And my curiosity won out. I prepped the painting for Brusho. So to prep it, I was really careful about using washi tape and masking fluid just to protect any areas of the flower that I wanted to preserve. You can use masking fluid over painted areas. I knew I wanted to protect like the ruffly white petal, the luscious yellow center of the flower, a little bit of color seeping into some of the other areas I thought might be kind of cool. So after I had prepped my surface and I made sure the masking fluid was completely dry, I took my atomizer bottle or my spray bottle and sprayed all of the areas in the painting that I wanted to include some Brusho. You can also manipulate it a little bit with a brush. You just want to make sure you actually have tons of water on the surface. After a little bit of experimentation, I did realize that more water tends to work better for making sure that the crystals are activated. So spraying with the spray bottle first, this was helping me control or decide where exactly I want the crystals to go. Now, in hindsight, if I could do this over again, I probably would have worked in sections rather than trying to do the whole thing all at once, just because I live in a dry climate and the paper dries out really fast. So I may have gotten better results if I had just worked in one corner at a time and worked my way across. But of course, hindsight is 20/20. So with my surface soaking wet and ready to go, I grabbed my first color. This is the dark brown. I love this color because it is a 3 pigment blend, and I just gently tapped it right over the surface. You can see the color just immediately exploding on the paper. I was kind of trying to imitate the colors that were in my reference photo. Behind the iris, there was actually a rock bed with multiple colored rocks sort of blurred out in the background. So the brown is imitating that a little bit. I shook it in between some of the leaves and a little bit in the lower portion of the painting. And wow, you can already see how fun that looks. The color is just beginning to soften out and blend in this really liquid sort of way. The next color I grabbed was my black. Now, normally in watercolor, I avoid black paint for the most part, but this particular black, again, is a multi-pigment mix, and it's just beautiful and super interesting. So I'm not going to be afraid to use this one. To help that spread a little bit more before using the black, I used my spray bottle to wet it even more. So if you're not getting the flow you desire, you can just keep adding some more water. You can also kind of tilt your board and encourage it to flow certain directions. But to some extent, it's just going to do its thing and you have to let it do what it will. So here at the bottom of the painting, I sprinkled on some black, letting it overlap with the brown a little bit. The more you use, the more richly pigmented it's going to look, as you can imagine. So I'm using quite a bit, being quite generous with the black. And I wasn't going to be afraid to ruin my green. It was nice having actually a base color underneath everything to sort of set the tone and give it something to work with. If it was just on the pure white, you would have to rely more entirely on the Brusho for covering the surface with color. So I'm tilting the board a little bit to encourage some water to flow, allowing that Brusho to blend and activate even more. But you can see how quickly it's drying out. It's not really spreading like I would like it to. And in some places there's pooling happening, and my paper, which is just 140-pound cotton cold pressed paper, even though it's on a block, is beginning to warp a little bit. So you can actually take a paper towel and remove some of the water back out if you want, if you find that there's just too much pooling happening. This was really my first experiment with using Brusho in an actual painting. I know, crazy. That's why I debated this for so long. But I will admit that at about this point in the painting, I was kind of freaking out like, oh no, I'm ruining it. What am I doing? So bullheadedly just kept adding more color and more paint and more water. So the next color I grabbed was yellow. I used water with just a brush, and I wanted to isolate the location of this right here in between those flower petals. So if you want to be really specific about where you put the brusho, just paint tiny little individual spots. And again, in hindsight, I would have done this in smaller sections if I had been planning a little bit better. So I'm going to apply some of that right here in between the petals of the flowers at the base of the flower. You can take your watercolor brush and push and pull that paint quite a bit, especially while it's still wet. But you can see even after wetting it, it's not spreading a ton. That's because it's not sopping wet. Puddles and pools, normally you want to avoid those in watercolor, but with the brusho, you get really interesting effects when you do have puddles. So I added a little bit more yellow up in the top left corner. All right, so once I had some colors down in the background, I thought, why don't we try using the purple and the ultramarine on the flower petals? Now this was probably the one spot, I'll tell you guys right now, that I probably should have just left alone, but I can't help myself. So I used the brush to wet it ahead of time. And then I dropped in the purple first, just a couple little sprinkles of the purple on the tips of the petals where I thought the color was most intense in the reference photo. And I probably should have left it alone at that point. That was already lots of color, but nope, I went for the ultramarine, which is actually super powerful. It's very pigmented. Actually, all of them are really pigmented, but the ultramarine seemed to kind of take over, especially when I sprayed it again with my spray bottle to add more water. I was trying to be a little bit more directional with my spray, going sideways to encourage it to spread. But you can see it kind of just sat there in these big bunches, and I wasn't super happy with that. So I tried to manipulate it, push it around a little bit. Again, this was my first try with this, so I really didn't know what I was doing. I used my brush to push and pull it a little bit while it dried, and I'm glad I did. I think that helped with the shapes. Sometimes when you're just letting it do what it will, you don't always get the shapes that you really want. So a little bit of manipulation can help with that. But as you can see, as it began to dry and everything really spread out nicely, those shapes look amazing. I love the top right corner of this painting where the brown just kind of bled out sideways. It almost looks like a blurry photograph with these effects. And I love the black and the green. So there were parts of it that I was super happy with. I would say if I could do it again, I probably wouldn't have added the blue and the purple and the flower petals. I think that was just a little bit much, but everything else I really liked. I also added some more green up on that leaf in the right corner, and I do like how that looked as well. The green being multi-pigmented is so beautiful and so interesting. To try to help balance out that purple and blue, I added some in the left side of the painting on the petal over there. I still hadn't removed all my masking fluid all the way, so I was trying to watch out for my white petals. A little bit of spill, a little bit of splash will happen if you're not protecting everything. There's always going to be like a little bit of that kind of spatter effect when you're using brusho, especially with the atomizer. But I actually really liked how that looked. That helped balance it a little bit. I did try some lifting, and as I mentioned before, because the brusho is so staining, it does not want to lift. So just keep that in mind. When you're putting down color, it's pretty much going to stay there. So there's the final painting with everything dry and the masking fluid removed. I was so glad that I didn't listen to my fear. I went ahead and took a risk and played with the brusho with this actual painting. I think it turned out so much more exciting and vibrant and just lifelike than if I had just left it the way it was before. Here's kind of a before and after. You guys can decide for yourselves if you liked that effect. No matter how much you try to control brusho, there will always be an element of spontaneity and unpredictability. I think that's part of the fun. And for a painter who prefers realism, this can be a great exercise in relinquishing control and just getting a little bit messy. I hope you guys enjoyed this little introduction to brusho. Thank you so much for watching today. Check out these other videos and I'll see you guys over there.